Nintendo and the Pokémon Company have announced Pokémon Sword and Shield.
This morning we got our first look at Generation 8 Pokémon Sword and Pokémon Shield.
This game is blowing Child Doug's brain.
Some of the most anticipated, hyped up games. However, they're also some of the most controversial.
The Pokémon fan base has lost their minds.
Pokémon is Nintendo's most stagnant and lazy franchise.
I actually regret buying this.
Hashtag Game Freak Lied has been trending all over Twitter.
This is the angriest I've seen the Pokémon community.
Everyone is so mad.
Pokémon is shit now. Pokémon is bad.
Being one of my earliest exposures to video games, Pokémon has long been the Nintendo franchise that I hold nearest to my heart. It encouraged my love for music, taught me certain rules, and brought me and my friends closer together. Through formative years, Pokémon played a role in showing me that it's okay to enjoy cute things, even as a grown-ass man, because at the end of the day, who cares about what anyone thinks? I'll dunk on you. The point is, I love this franchise. Understand that all of my criticisms and opinions stem from a passion for Pokemon and video games in general. It's not my intention to stir shit up, and keep in mind this is not a review. Just a few things that I really wanted to talk about. With that being said, let's stir some shit up. It's been difficult to watch the gradual decline of the mainline Pokemon series. With the releases of Generation 6 and 7, community reception had been divided between those who called for modernization and innovation, and those who were happy enough just playing the same game with new Pokemon. Although numbers never tell the full story, it's fair to say that the series was long overdue for a commercial success of its own standards. Following the release of the Switch, other major Nintendo franchises came out swinging. The consistency of quality that we've seen from several of Nintendo's biggest IPs is unparalleled by any single publisher in such a short period of time. So when Pokémon, the highest grossing media franchise of all time, announced that they were finally bringing a mainline game to the Switch, the community was ready, to say the least. Go home, ladies and gentlemen. It was fated to become the most anticipated release on the console and the fastest selling Pokemon game of all time. Pressure had never been higher for developer Game Freak. More gameplay and trailers were released, a few questionable comments were made, one thing led to another, and Game Freak was in a hot seat. Mom? It was apparent that corners were being cut and the community was quick to voice their concerns. Fast forward to release day, we finally got to see what was up. Heavily leaning on nostalgia and branding, Sword and Shield is a poor execution of an outdated format. It's a product of Game Freak's lack of inspiration and inability to adapt. Its gameplay systems and technology make little effort to bring the series up to speed with other major releases. Unfortunately, Pokémon Sword and Shield continues the series' trend towards mediocrity. In the late 80s, the soon-to-be bestseller, Super Mario Bros. 3 was dropping pennies all across Japan, and despite such exclusives as Michael Jackson's Moonwalk, developer Sega was getting their ass handed to them by Nintendo. Sega was in desperate need of a franchise to compete with the Mario series, and thus Mr. Needlemouse was born. By 1992, Sega controlled more than 60% of the console market, dethroning Nintendo for the first time since 1985. The massive success of Sonic the Hedgehog and soon Sonic 2 can largely be attributed to its unique game feel. It offered an alternative to Mario's slower, more calculated gameplay, instead choosing to focus on speed and flow. The games felt smooth and satisfying beyond anything gamers had experienced before. Although abstract, the concept of game feel is easily one of the most important aspects of game design. Game feel has no formal definition, but is most commonly explained by asking, does the world and its systems feel fun to interact with, even when you strip away the scenery, story, and nostalgia? Everyone's favorite example, Super Mario 64. Mario's controls, abilities, and physics are a perfect balance of input and response. Level design aside, controlling Mario is enjoyable. While game feel is entirely different from genre to genre, fundamental actions should always feel good and allow players to express their input with minimal limitations and a satisfying feedback. When we first saw gameplay trailers for Gen 8, the wild area had our attention. A wide open 3D area with overworld Pokemon. it would be an ambitious new experience for the series. As Game Freak showed signs of moving away from a 2.5D game world, I was looking forward to a Sword and Shield that adopted many of the modern mechanics that go along with that. Admittedly, I came in with high expectations and was soon disappointed to find out that key features such as the advertised rotating camera system and even collision detection were subpar by the standards of games as old as Wind Waker. The game feels stiff and clunky beyond anything I've played in recent memory. Take for example, the whistle function. Expanding on Pokemon Let's Go, whistling can be used to attract overworld Pokemon your way. However, the actual animation for this feature, it's pretty bad. It doesn't matter if you were walking around, your character is immediately locked in place for almost 2 seconds. It's so awkward and unwieldy, I might have actually preferred the developer just use a sound and no animation at all, like they did for the bike bell. On the other hand, Breath of the Wild allows you to whistle while moving about and will even appropriately suspend the sound and animation if you pull out an item or fall into water. Sure, a simple whistle animation doesn't ruin your overall playthrough, but Sword and Shield is littered with these game feel time bombs. Fixed animations for jumping down ledges, picking up items, and ridiculous collision boxes on NPCs and objects. Okay. Oh my god, get out of my... Route 8 looks bad, and while you can see the exit from the entrance, it's a drawn out and confusing cluster of sticky ladder animations and terrible camera angles. It's like the Pokemon equivalent of a water level, except without the good music. Hardly any aspects of this game feel good to interact with. It's a developer's job to minimize the frequency at which a player asks, why can't I do this? Why can't I do that? Why can't I walk up this tiny fucking step? Look how small it is! Even within the JRPG genre, Pokemon seems so far behind other major releases. Kingdom Hearts 3 and Dragon Quest XI's gameplay systems allow you to explore the world with far fewer restrictions. These are by no means groundbreaking games, but for the genre, they do so much more to improve the player's experience. Turning away from the overworld, the concept of game feel can also be applied to things like menus, heads-up display, and scripted sequences like Pokemon battles. For example, PowerPoints, or PP, are an indicator of how many more times you can use a specific move before you get a full heal. This system is reminiscent of an earlier time in Pokemon, when it served to balance and maintain the prestige of certain moves like Earthquake and Leech Seed. Fortunately for players, over the past 23 years, game developers have innovated and pushed the envelope of what a resource management system can be. We've seen simple and complex takes on the mechanic, for better and worse. Unfortunately, PP has remained almost entirely unchanged since Pokemon's 1996 debut, and is still a feature that graces each title Game Freak releases. Throughout my entire playthrough, I never had to think twice about PowerPoints, nor did it ever really have an impact on a battle. At worst, it's an inconvenience that forces you to and from the Poké Center, as you bang your head against the wall that is route whatever, and at best, it's a mechanic that doesn't have an impact on the combat anyways. Take games like Dishonored, Dragon Quest XI, Breath of the Wild, and even platformers like Hollow Knight and Celeste, where resource management systems may be simple, but they lead to interesting gameplay decisions and a more satisfying experience. I know that I'm nitpicking here because who gives a shit about the PP system, but here I think it serves to illustrate an underlying issue with Sword and Shield. After asking a couple of veteran Pokemon players for their opinions on PP, it boiled down to, it's always been in the game, so it's still in the game? Pokemon has, to a great extent, stuck to the same mechanics and gameplay for the entirety of its lifespan. And while I love to see franchises reinvent themselves, a lot of these issues are features that fans will argue define the series, similar to how Super Smash Bros. Has always involved knocking opponents off stage, or how Mario Kart has always been a kart racing game with items. However, Smash Bros. And Mario Kart's core mechanics have been improved upon, tweaked, and refined with each release, leading up to what we have today. Whether or not they're your favorites, Ultimate and 8 Deluxe are the most polished and positively tactile games we've seen from the respective franchises. I would hesitate to say that Sword and Shield is the best version of Pokemon gameplay. Game Freak has failed to nurture and develop the Pokemon formula over the years, falling further and further behind its counterparts. Whose idea was it to do this? Looking back on the previous couple of generations, it's clear that Game Freak's handle on difficulty has left something to be desired. And now you've heard it, we've all heard it. When a game is too easy, it's boring for experienced players. When it's too difficult, it runs the risk of scaring off new players. However, in Sword and Shield, difficulty is an issue that afflicts veteran and casual fans alike. There are plenty of videos out there that will run down the list explaining exactly how Pokemon X and Y, Sun and Moon, and now Sword and Shield are some of the easiest we've seen come out of the franchise. I want to talk about about why exactly difficulty is so critical in these games. Within the community, this has been, so far, one of the loudest criticisms of Generation 8. But the negative impact that this has on newcomers to the franchise is something that I feel isn't being talked about enough. Because while an easy game helps represent less experienced users, it also leads them to less engaging gameplay, as beginners are never challenged to actually learn how to use the unique systems and mechanics. I'd be willing to bet that most new players get through this entire game without learning the ins and outs of type matchups or held items. The tutorial doesn't explicitly teach you these systems, which is fine, but the game never gives the player a reason to experiment with these tools. Why bother learning when I'm already over-leveled for this gym and the game tells me exactly what moves will be effective? Consequently, many players miss out on the most rewarding and memorable gameplay moments Pokemon has to offer. There is a surprising amount of built-in strategy and intricacies to combat, and it's a shame to see it become less and less relevant with each release. Many of my fondest Pokemon memories involve discovering a new way to approach and eventually overcome an obstacle. Of course, it was never anything too crazy, but these moments provided me with feelings of satisfaction and accomplishment, words that never crossed my mind throughout my Pokemon Sword playthrough. Difficulty in games leads to memorable player experiences. This is the reason why the Nuzlocke challenge is so popular right now. Nuzlocke is a fan-created challenge where you play through a Pokemon title abiding by a strict set of self-imposed rules. The basics being, any Pokemon that faints is considered dead, you can only capture the first Pokemon you encounter in an area, and a blackout is game over. I highly suggest you watch Jaiden's video because it's full of unique gameplay moments that make Pokemon Ruby feel like a dynamic and exciting adventure. I'm not suggesting that Pokemon goes so far to do anything like that, but Sword and Shield just wasn't a step in the right direction. I know Game Freak doesn't have the best track record when it comes to programming and optimization, but consider how simple of a fix this could have been. Some stat balancing, or if they insist on a baby shit mode, then how about some difficulty options? They've done it before with Black and White 2's easy, normal, and challenge mode, the latter of which went so far as to increase trainers' AI as well as the level and IVs of their Pokemon. It even added extra Pokemon, new movesets, and held items to gym leaders and Elite Four teams. We know that it's something they're capable of. Everyone's experience with each game is unique, but for me, nothing is compared to the feeling of accomplishment when finally beating Sabrina's Alakazam in Red or Clay's Excadrill in Black. I really hate to be cynical, but the only satisfaction I felt in Sword was the relief of finally being released into the overworld after clicking through all the lines of dialogue at the end of clicking through all the menus of a battle right before I hit the home button and then Alt 4, Command Option Escape, call my professor to let him know that I finally found a bigger fucking waste of time. Or just play something else. Outside of battle, so much of the exploratory nature of the series has been stripped away. Classic Pokemon labyrinths make way for purely linear routes and buildings. Rotom marks the waypoint of every objective, from the beginning of the game all the way until you become champion. Which, for a game that markets itself as an adventure, does a lot more to make me feel like my mommy is my chaperone for my big 5th grade field trip, like, Mom! Gone are the days of teaching a Pokemon fly. Now you can instantly fast travel to any city as long as you've been there once. The extent of XP sharing gives you almost no incentive to train any other Pokemon, and you literally can't go 3 fights on the first few routes without someone sneezing and giving you a full heal. And while I agree the difficulty is certainly geared towards beginners and young players, I can't even fully back the "it's balanced for kids" argument, because so many of the most popular games with kids nowadays are games that aren't that easy. My little stepbrother was obsessed with Fortnite for the longest time, and no one in my family is ever really sure if he actually won himself a game. No. Kind of trash. On top of that, in like every online game, fucking 13-year-old kids are mopping the floor with me. A lot of these kids don't want easy games. Unless they've turned the mainline Pokemon games into a series for toddlers, Sword and Shield's difficulty was a total misfire. I wasn't even trying. Like, I was hardly trying. I was like, it was not even, like, not at all. Like, not at all. One morning I was taking a stroll through Hatno Village, you know, cutting down people's trees and shit. I wanted to explore the world west of here, so I bought some arrows, gathered whatever weapons I could find, and stole a lady's chicken for... We're taking the lead! Headed out of town, I took a leap of faith off a cliff with my chicken in hand as I glided across a forest. I heard a woman cry and I knew that she was in danger. Threw on my Teen Titans mask and glided towards the scene like I was motherfucking Tom Cruise! I glided through the forest canopy, cock in hand, above head. And then I dropped, slayed the monsters, and saved 2 ladies. I don't know what. And as they looked at me in the eyes, they didn't really give it shit. They kind of just like I think I didn't activate the right. These weird individual experiences are the most compelling and rewarding moments in games. No one told me to do any of that. My unique input led me to experience an in-game event in a way the developers probably never imagined, and I had a story I was excited to tell my stupid friends about. Breath of the Wild does a great job of providing the player with consistent and satisfying tools to forge their own adventure. Forge their own adventure? Who wrote this? When you think about it, this is at the core of what a video game is. Sure, many games have great stories to tell, but at the end of the day, games are all about interaction, bringing yourself into a world, and seeing your inputs reflected in the game's feedback. Whether that be losing in Tetris because you'll never learn how to use the fucking Z-block, or watching as Kirat turns into a totalitarian drug state because you chose to support the wrong rebel group. Did I do that? As you can imagine, some games will always get this better than others. Don't get me wrong, there were moments in Sword and Shield I really enjoyed, nostalgia aside, although these usually came in the form of a scripted sequence. Cinderace's Power Ball looks awesome in battle, on some Mosala shit, but it's hard to stay excited about a single badass fighting animation when you remember that, oh yeah, you're gonna watch this over and over again for the rest of the game. Forever. Many of the best moments in this game are overshadowed by a lack of any sort of interaction or adaptation. Traveling through the Galar mines in the Slumbering World were a few of my favorite experiences, being the better looking and or sounding areas in the game. Unfortunately, thanks to a stripped down fast travel system, there's almost no reason you'd journey any of these routes a second time. Of course, if you're trying to complete your Pokédex, then alright, God bless you. But for those of us who aren't psychopaths, the world is reduced to a series of menu selections. Not even the story asks you to revisit and explore a route. The wild area is usually offered as the excuse, but looking at earlier installments and Generation 8 side by side, they seem to have taken a step backwards. Generation 4 had 13 legendary Pokemon, and hunting these down involved interesting side quests and real exploration. I remember discovering Lake Valor and wandering into the Valor Cavern. The wonder that washed over me when I first saw a Zelf's reflection on the ground is a feeling that I honestly still recall to this day. Side note, I know that creating new Pokemon is always going to be an uphill battle, and that nostalgia plays a role in this, but these legendaries had so much character compared to the 3 that Sword and Shield gives us. Look, it's debatable whether or not Sword and Shield is the best looking Pokemon world. However, without a doubt, it's devoid of content and character like we've never seen before. Everywhere I go, NPCs know exactly who I am and what I've been up to. Interacting with them will almost always result in them saying something like, Pokemon hide in tall grass, or can't wait to watch Clay's next match. It never feels like I'm talking with a co-resident of the world. It feels like Game Freak speaking to me through a bunch of sprites, urging me to keep the story chugging along. I don't mind being the hero in a role-playing game, but I want to feel like I am part of the world, not like the world revolves around me. Even the scripted sequences of past generations seem better fleshed out and more interesting. The Darkrai and Cresselia storylines tell the story of a boy who's fallen into a tormented, coma-like state, possessed by a mythical Pokemon. Speaking to his parents, you learn that they're worried he might never wake up from this nightmare. People had died before. What? The quest eventually leads you to an encounter with Cresselia, also known as the Cornflakes Rooster, at which point she flutters away, leaving you to track her down as she moves all about the Sinnoh region. Okay, no one expects these games to have incredible narratives, but Generation 8 cut any sense of discovery and instead offered one of the goofiest legendary stories we've ever seen. What is this shit? Pokemon has always straddled the line between a free-form adventure and a hands-inside-the-wheel roller coaster. However, Sword and Shield fails to deliver on either of these formats, inhibited by a sleepy game world, clunky game feel, and baby shit difficulty. As an audio boy, sound design and music is something I'm often immediately drawn to in video games. When I think about it, a lot of my earliest gamer memories are, for better or worse, linked to music. It's often overlooked, but well-executed game audio can make the difference between a great experience and a forgettable one. All games fall somewhere on a spectrum between linear and adaptive design, depending on the variables and player freedoms the developer has to account for. In more linear games like the Uncharted series, a sound designer will create a more specific audio experience, similar to how movies are scored. If every player is going to approach an event the same way, then developers can focus on fine-tuning the mix and pacing. Rockstar takes this technique to the extreme. When you can fail a player for stepping out of line, it allows engineers to build an incredibly theatrical experience. In recent years, developers have begun implementing more complex, adaptive systems for audio integration. A dynamic game requires engineers to work alongside musicians and producers to create systems to deal with players interacting with the game in a huge variety of ways. While many nuances go unnoticed by most, a thorough adaptive audio engine serves to enrich players' experience and encourages them to experiment with the game's mechanics. Since the release of games like Ocarina of Time, Nintendo has come to be known for its impressive attention to detail when it comes to the integration of audio. In the Game Freak tradition, Pokémon Sword and Shield has no shortage of solid music. It's only a shame they neglect the union of game and audio. In many cases, they rely on systems and sounds as old as the series itself. Some of the most jarring examples can be seen when picking up an item or leveling a Pokémon mid-battle. Any rolling music will immediately cut for the appropriate sound effect. While this certainly plays a nostalgia card, it feels awkward and disrupts the flow of an already clunky game. When I'm exploring the world or finally invested in a battle, nothing kills the mood like... The simplest solution is just to create short sound effects that don't conflict with the music. However, Super Mario Odyssey approaches this problem by creating dynamic sound effects like power lines and footsteps that will harmonize to the chord progression of any song that's playing. Breath of the Wild takes it a step further by adding small variations and in-time cymbal crashes to the music after striking an enemy. These systems give the player's input weight and satisfying feedback without interrupting the experience. Pokémon's user interface and game world are filled with cheap audio solutions. Walking towards, encountering, and entering battle with a trainer prompts 3 separate songs, each of which hard cuts into the next. Game Freak had the opportunity to develop a cohesive experience, as they made the jump to a console many times more powerful than anything they'd worked on before. Instead, Sword and Shield opted for something more reminiscent of its handheld history. I enjoy the musical style of Pokémon, but these songs depreciate through a static and repetitive audio engine. Given the incredible detail and success of its peers and the range of powerful audio middle engines available, the timing couldn't have been better. Yet, Game Freak made no effort to improve upon their decade-old format. I know games work just fine with the sound off. For most people, a shitty sound effect or lazy integration aren't the kind of things that will ruin a game for you. But for that reason, a detailed sound design is usually an indicator of a truly, fully realized project. I legitimately spent 15 minutes just sneaking around as Link, listening to how different clothes, materials, and weapons sounded attached to my back. As pointed out by Scruffy, when you equip or consume anything that improves your stealth stat, not only does it lower the volume of your movement, but you can hear how Link handles each weapon in a unique and distinctly cautious way. The developers took the time to record all these tiny variations. As a player, that made me feel like... I'm an audio boy, for real. But I'd argue it affects all players' experience more than we give it credit for. It's honestly sad to see that Game Freak made no attempt to bring Pokémon into the world of modern sound design. You can't tell me that somebody tested this and thought, yeah, that seems right. Game Freak continually chooses the path of least resistance, and it's clear they're not ready to give up cashing in on fans' nostalgia. Graphics and technology have been at the cutting edge of complaints since the beginning of the Sword and Shield controversy. Game Freak cheaped out on us. Again, there are plenty of videos out there that do a great job running down the list of textures, models, animation, draw distance, performance. Let's instead check in with our boys. In an interview, Junichi Masuda reflected back on his experience developing the first generation of Pokémon back in the 90s. From the inception of the idea to the completion of Red and Blue took a total of about 6 years. It was difficult. The thing we wanted to focus on at the start was communication and trading, but it was difficult to do that as we could only transfer small amounts of data between 2 consoles. The technology just wasn't there, but we really wanted to do it, so we fought to get it in there. That was an overriding theme. It was a fight against capacity, a fight against what we could fit onto a cartridge. We had designed these 150 odd Pokemon to get in as well. But then we had the problem of movement, so we came up with the idea of the map tiles being the things that moved, while the character was animated in place. With these ideas, we found ways to squeeze in as much as we possibly could. In their early days, Game Freak was pushing the limits of the hardware Nintendo provided. They were so passionate about including Pokemon trading, they stretched to work with the Game Link cable's limited bandwidth. They spent years economizing Generation 1 so they could include their entire vision. I'm by no means an expert when it comes to programming, but I can at least recognize passion. Sword and Shield gives us recycled animations, GameCube quality textures, and other huge economic cutbacks. And despite all that, the game still only runs at half the maximum frame rate of a docked Switch, at best. There's no excuse for this kind of stuff. We've seen plenty of great looking games and well optimized ports run perfectly on the Switch. In the heat of the Dexit craze, Game Freak posed the question, National Pokédex or Rich Gaming Experience, assuring fans that Pokemon had only been cut in order to allocate more resources to things such as developing brand new models. There's some debate as to what exactly they meant by this, but we know there's been at least a little bit of deception. Besides, these games rely so heavily on sentiment and nostalgia, it makes sense that people will be mad about Pokemon cuts. At the very least, Game Freak's handling of the situation was irresponsible.
No comment.
In October, Shigeru Omori, the director of Sword and Shield, was asked in an interview. A lot of people talk about this being the first real Pokemon console RPG. Do you think of it that way? In his response, he describes the Nintendo Switch as a non-traditional console. It was a bit concerning to hear him qualify the Switch like this. Yes, it's not quite as powerful as its current gen counterparts, but it's still many times more powerful than a 3DS, PS3, or 360. And it's not even far behind a baseline Xbox One or PS4. It felt as if he was reeling in his past comments regarding his plans to create the ultimate Pokemon game. Later in the interview, Junichi Masuda doubled down when he said, if the Switch had come out as a traditional console, and then at the same time they released a separate portable device, I think it would be safe to say we would have developed on the portable device. They never wanted this. As Nintendo innovated and blurred the lines between handheld and big boy console, Game Freak looked on with unease. Maybe their vision for the franchise was only of handheld games, or maybe they knew they couldn't live up to the expectations of a console release. To them, 720p was a big enough jump in itself. I want to clarify, I'm not mad at these guys. They deserve to retire as video game legends whenever they'd like. They created one of the most beloved and successful franchises of all time, working out of home offices. But now, Game Freak has grown complacent. As a young company, they once pushed technology to its limit, but have long since lost pride in their work. It certainly didn't help that Pokemon's mainline Switch debut followed such well-executed and imaginative releases from its sister franchises. Those were tough acts to follow, and Game Freak was under a lot of pressure that they probably didn't deserve. To their credit, Generation 8 did well to capture the magic of Pokemon. I prefer Let's Go's graphics, I mean, what the fuck happened there? But the starters are among the most recognizable and likable that I've seen. I even had two friends tell me all about how this would be the first game they finally completed a Pokédex. But the fandom mindset is an asset they rely far too heavily on. Really, what did we expect? If not to make a great game, what motivation did Game Freak have to really invest in this game? As the first Pokemon on a home console, it was going to sell no matter what. Yet, no matter how good it was, it would never be more profitable than a free mobile app. In a lot of ways, Game Freak's Pokemon is like the jealous brother who never moved out of the house, watching as his siblings move on and become successful.
Yes! Wow! Congratulations, little bro.
From gameplay to technology, the passion is nowhere to be found. It's at this point which many people point to the money. The average budget for a mainline Pokemon game is estimated to be a meager $20 million. Yet, Pokemon is the second highest selling franchise of all time. In the words of Ariana Grande, whoever said money can't solve your problems must not have had enough money to solve them. Maybe. Or maybe the veteran staff is just burnt out at this point. Or maybe the lifespan of these games doesn't yield enough time to create a complete project. Game Freak is under constant pressure to meet deadlines and coordinate with the anime, merch, and the rest of the Pokemon company. Whatever the case, I think the recent protests in the community has roots deeper than Sword and Shield. Game Freak has always been keen on playing it safe and sticking with what's worked. I fell in love with the Pokemon format as a kid, but as an adult, I'm disappointed to see that nothing's changed. At this point, I'm honestly tired of being so negative. If you're enjoying playing Sword and Shield, then please, by all means, have fun. Have fun out there. What am I saying? Game Freak, thank you for the memories. I guess I'll see you guys at Knife and Bat. I care about Pokemon. I just want to see it spread its wings and fly. "10 out of 10, you're definitely going to want to pick this one up.